This is not a Game Boy Color, but it really, really wants to be. This is the FPGBC. It's a clone console like the Analog Pocket and the Mod Retro Chromatic that is cosplaying as a Game Boy Color. It's not nearly as good as those other handhelds, but it sure is cheaper. For around $80 to $100, you can grab this almost Game Boy Color that plays almost every Game Boy and Game Boy Color game almost perfectly. You can get this thing fully built for $100 from Funny Playing directly, but most people just buy the kit because it's cheaper, and honestly, this is simple enough to put together that my grandparents could do it. Love you, Grandma and Grandpa. It doesn't require soldering, and it's way easier than your average Lego set to assemble. In fact, I'm only going to dedicate one quick paragraph to the assembly in this video. But first, let's talk about what all you need, because this kit doesn't actually come with everything you need. What the kit does come with is all of the necessary electronic pieces: the board, speaker, battery, and screen. You also need to buy a shell, but it can't just be any GBC shell. It has to be one of these that fits the screen, and it also has to have the cutout at the bottom for the USB-C port. The shell will come with the IR cover, for the non-existent IR blaster, and it comes with the screws. You will also need to buy a set of GBC buttons and membranes, because why would those come with a shell for a brand new device? And you might need to buy a Phillips 1 and a Y0 screwdriver if you don't have those already. Now you're good to go. Retromodding was kind enough to send all of this out to me for free. Shout out to Gary for making that happen. And they also sent me a copy of their new GBC game, Infinity, to test out on this new hardware, which we will definitely talk about more later. And while this video isn't sponsored, I would like to mention that you can grab anything you need for this project and a ton of other cool retro modding projects from retromodding.com, and you can use code Jake to save some money. Now that we have all the pieces, let's quickly put it together. Peel the peels for the double-sided tape off of the screen lens and stick it to the shell like this. Drop your buttons, useless IR cover, and membranes into their holes. From there, you can attach the screen to the motherboard and place it in the shell, and then plug in the speaker. Screw it down with the 3 Phillips screws and remove the unnecessary battery tabs in the butt of your shell. Then stick your battery in there with the wire sticking out of the hole and plug it in here. Now you can screw the 2 halves together with the 6 remaining tri-wing screws. Flip on your power switch, and if you did it right, it should be calling you a funny boy. If you would like more than a paragraph of instruction, you're lucky I made a second channel walkthrough video, because Funny Playing has 0 instructions on their website, nor did I get any included instructions physically, not even a QR code. So if you need more help, my video will be linked down below the like button. I just don't want to bog all that down here, because it is honestly pretty simple enough to figure out on your own. But before you even go buying this cheapo GBC, I really think you should hear what I think about it. I want to first talk about my conflict of interest, because if you didn't know, I sell modded Game Boys on my website, retroremaster.com. So there are going to be some of you who won't trust my opinion on this thing, but at least hear me out, because I truly believe I can be fair and objective here. Let's start with the settings, shall we? If you press in the volume wheel, a menu will pop up. The first option is brightness controls. Press A to raise it and B to lower it. Then you can use the D-pad to scroll up and down. You can only adjust the brightness in the menu. There are no shortcuts or even an inaccurate touchpad to adjust the brightness on the fly. You can use the volume rocker outside of the menu to adjust the sound, but oddly enough, it is opposite of what the controls say on the shell. I do also want to mention this real quick in here, because I forgot to write about it in the script. There is actually a sleep mode if you press in and hold the volume wheel. At least there's supposed to be. Maybe it has to be a regular cartridge. Hold up. If you press in and hold it, there we go. Probably doesn't work on flash cards like with Analog Pocket. But from what I've heard, I have not been able to test the power draw on this device. But from what I've heard, it pretty much draws the same amount of power anyways. So you're basically just pausing it, turning off the screen and stuff like that. I really never use the sleep mode here, but it is here. So that's a positive. Back to the script. You can adjust the screen size to be stretched to full size or a 4x integer scale with or without a pixel grid. I originally thought that the full screen would annoy me. I ended up preferring it to the integer scaling because I don't like the double black bars, especially since it isn't an OLED panel, so the black is still beaming light and draining battery. However, I will say I think I would have preferred the 4X if it was better centered and there was no stretched option with just some bigger bezels. Kind of like just a modded Game Boy Color screen, but more centered without the Game Boy logo, because I know they can't do that. That's why the screen is the way it is, because I prefer pixel perfect accuracy. But honestly, it doesn't look inaccurate on this screen from what I've played. The EMU options are just the same screen sizes with a more muted color palette, but to me, it looks like it just adds a gross green filter. Next up, we have the cores. GBC is obviously for GBC games, but for original Game Boy games, you can run it in GB mode to get the monotone look back. The GB palette setting will only affect the GB mode, so you can change the colors of the monochromatic screen. And the GB color fix is a band-aid fix for when colors in certain games get all messed up from using the different cores. I didn't run into that issue in testing, but maybe I can find something in the B-roll, or you'll be seeing footage from somebody else's video right now. Thanks, whoever I got this footage from. Frame mix is a setting that basically blends frames together to mimic the slow pixel response time of the original Game Boy screens. It's important because developers would use that slow response time to make a transparent effect in some games, and with new screen technology, it just ends up being a flickery mess. This is a pretty standard setting now with IPS mods, and I only really turn it on when I play a game that needs it. Lastly, we have the clock speed setting, so you can run games slightly slower or slightly faster. There really is no in between. We'll talk about that later. Earlier, I complained twice about the fact that there is no IR stuff in this console, but honestly, who cares? Yeah, I'd like to have this be a fully fledged GBC clone, but I'll be okay not being able to send and receive Gmail messages in Mary-Kate and Ashley Pocket Planner. It does still retain the link port, and it's probably still fully functional here. I say that because Taki Udon reported having issues with it, but one, the FPGBC has had quite a few updates since then, and it could be fixed now, but two, I don't think these problems actually stem from the link port. As we talked about in the settings, we can adjust the clock speed here, which I do think is kind of cool that we have a built-in overclocking mod here, sort of. But if you've seen my video where I overclock my GBA, it's a pretty glitchy mess. And while it's not as bad as the overclock GBA, I've seen some pretty similar effects here. But the worst part is, the default clock speed on the FPGBC is not accurate. It's close, but no cigar. In fact, I don't think most people would notice it, but the reason I want to make a big stink about it is I think this is the reason why I'm having so many graphical issues. Like I said earlier, Retromodding sent me their ROM for their new game Infinity and asked me to show it off in this video since it's finally coming out on December 22nd. And I was honestly a little skeptical that I would like it because the only turn-based RPG that I've ever had interested in was Pokemon. But knowing this is a GBC game that is pushing the original hardware to the max, I thought it would be the perfect game to put the FPGBC through its paces. Two things. One, I'm 3 hours into Infinity and it's genuinely a lot of fun. And two, the FPGBC does not like this game. It's constantly having graphical issues like wonky text boxes and oddly misplaced textures. It looks and feels a lot like the issues I had while overclocking Pokemon on my GBA. But the kicker is, I was running this game at the default clock speed, which is the closest clock speed they have to the original. Which leads me to believe that because the closest clock speed option to the original isn't exact, it can produce issues like this. But I'm sure that the Analog Pocket and the Mod Retrochromatic and other FPGA devices like this aren't going to be perfectly accurate in sync with an original Game Boy. But I'm guessing that it's far off enough with this that it is making it an issue. But again, it's still close enough that most people aren't going to notice. I don't know. But I'm also like, okay, how hard is it really to get the timing down perfectly? I feel like it's just like a math equation. Maybe not a simple one, but I feel like math could give us the perfect answer to emulate the crystal. I don't know. All that being said, most games will probably work just fine on the FPGBC, but I can't guarantee that they all will, especially future releases. But to be fair, in the other games that I have tried with this, everything's worked perfectly fine. Even my game Mashed worked perfectly on this thing. You could argue that this is happening because it's a pre-release game, in that the FPGBC came out well before this game. You could also argue that it's because I'm running it on a flash cart and the FPGBC is known to have issues with flash carts. I will talk about that more later, but I would say that the Analog Pocket ran it just fine and it also has issues with flash carts. And it also work just fine the same way on a chromatic and a real GBC, modded and unmodded. And you might mention that this is a cheaper device than those other clone consoles, and also cheaper than an equivalent modded Game Boy, which is totally fair. To me, I think if you just want the cheapest Game Boy Color with a modern screen, sure, buy this. Just expect it to be fairly imperfect. If you want the best of the best, go for the analog pocket, or I guess the chromatic if that's more your style. Obviously, I'm partial to original hardware. And there are so many options you can go with when it comes to modded GBCs. Personally, I don't think you need a LiPo battery in a modded GBC, especially if you have a decent set of rechargeable AA's, which is what I prefer. I still think that Game Boy amp mods sound bad unless you fully redesign the board around the amp. And if you already have a stock GBC, you can mod it with a new shell, buttons, membranes, and even a solderless drop-in screen mod for like 40 to 50 bucks from AliExpress. And I've never had an issue like this with an original Game Boy Color. Just saying. To me, I don't think it's the worst device for those who are just getting started with the Game Boy and Game Boy Color games and don't want to break the bank. I could also see this as a great way to get your younger kids started on their gaming journey without having to worry about them breaking your premium product. And it could also be like the coolest kind of present where it's like a KiwiCo style crate, but it's like a video game console that you build. I think that would be awesome. I would have killed for that as a 10-year-old. The thing I want to stress here is if you want to buy this device, set your expectations low. It's probably going to work just fine 90% of the time, but expect glitches and other issues to pop up. Plus, despite getting my flash cart to work on here, I have to load the game I want to play on the flash cart on a different console and then swap back to the FPGBC to get it to work on there. Like the initial load on the flash cart doesn't always work on the FPGBC, but if it's the most recently loaded game on the flash cart, it works just fine. Only sometimes can I load another game on the flash cart while using the FPGBC. So for those reasons, I don't really recommend it, but you do you, boo. But what do you guys think about the FPGBC? Is it worth the jank? Let me know in those comments down below. Thanks again to Retromodding for sending this out, and to their games company, Incubate Games, for the advanced copy of Infinity. Everything I mentioned today should be linked in the description. If you're interested in more FPGA goodness, I should be getting my Analog 3D any day now, and I'll be reviewing that very soon on the channel, so get subscribed so you don't miss that video when it comes out. And despite me cutting in unscripted all the time throughout this video, that's about it from me. So like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Later, guys. Jake sells GBC shells by the GBC shore.